Of the day. As we begin our next session, let me just take time to quickly introduce to you our moderator, and Carol will kindly introduce the rest of her panel. But Carol Vallone is the CEO of Educate Online. Higher education innovation has happened at many points and in many places, and I think, as was indicative of the conversation you just heard, behind the great work that institutions are doing, there are often organizations and companies that are building technology and bringing it to bear in ways that allow institutions to make these innovations work. And Carol's really been, I think, behind a lot of that work over the number of years that she's been working in higher education. She served as the board chair and president and CEO of Wimba Corporation, which was a global leader in virtual collaboration software in higher education for many years. She also founded WebCT. I'm going to guess that if I had you raise hands, there'd be a lot of former WebCT users out there. Back in 1999, it defined and delivered sort of one of the primary online e-learning solutions for higher education. And in addition to her work with these entities and Educate Online, Carol's also been involved in the policy dialogue as well. She's formerly a member of the National School to Work Advisory Council and is very attuned to not just the needs of institutions, but the broader policy environment that I think we've spent a fair amount of time talking about already this morning. So with that, we'll turn the time to Carol and to her distinguished panel as well. Thanks.
Thanks so much, Michael. And congratulations, Michael, to you and the New England Board of Higher Education team. Clearly a rich program today, and the sold-out audience indicates there's a real interest in New England. As Michael mentioned, Educate Online is a Massachusetts-based company. So first, let me start by introducing the panelists. Rob Lytle, at the end here, Managing Director at Parthenon, which is a leading advisory organization focused on strategy consulting. The company has served as an advisor to the education industry since 1991. Rob is a strategic advisor. He co-heads Parthenon's education practice. He's lots of experience working with higher ed institutions, particularly those serving working adults, continuing education, and online students. And Rob has also been working on competency-based models with institutions for the past 3 years. At the end, Dr. John LaBrie. He's the Dean of the College of Professional Studies and Vice President for Professional Education at Northeastern University. In his role there, John has been instrumental in helping Northeastern launch its regional campus network, as well as transnational programs in Vietnam, Hong Kong, and Australia. The College of Professional Studies offers more than 30 graduate professional degrees and is the home of Northeastern's School of Education. John is in the process of launching a new iteration of the Lowell Institute at Northeastern, which will be the first in the nation entirely dedicated to degree completion programs in the STEM fields for transfer and adult students. John is an advocate for the adult learner. He's been an online educator for more than 20 years. He holds a doctorate in education from the University of Pennsylvania, and he's received national recognition from the Association of Continuing Higher Ed and the North American Association of Summer Sessions. Dr. John Ebersole, he's been the president of Excelsior College in Albany, New York since 2006. Prior positions, Boston University, Colorado State, UC Berkeley. He has spent all of his time in higher education working with the older, employed, post-traditional student. At Excelsior, John oversees the oldest and largest competency-based nursing program in the world. The college also offers 2 assessment-based bachelor's degrees, one in business, the other in liberal arts. Excelsior is the home to the Center for Education Measurement, which offers more than 60 mastery exams and is in the process of developing competency assessments. And a bit about me, as Michael said, I launched WebCT in the late 90s just to make me feel good. How many WebCT institutions are here? Okay, that makes me feel great. So, as you know, we built the first e-learning system in post-secondary education, and I'm really proud of the fact that we built that company with the industry, and today, virtually every campus has some sort of online program. Took over Wimba after that, another post-secondary education company, built and sold that company as well. And then Educate Online, super exciting for me, took it over 2 years ago. Company's been focused on competency-based instruction for a number of years. We have a 49-member product and strategic advisory board. Michael actually chairs our strategic advisory board. And we've been working on developing models in post-secondary education around CBE. And what our partners have told us is, help us to launch CBE programs, help us with investment capital, which we do, help us to determine which programs we should launch in CBE, which we do, help us to design those programs and help us to align those to the employer's needs, which we do, help us to deliver marketing, recruiting, and retention, and help us to host that on your proprietary technology built around CBE. So in fact, I'm also delighted to talk about the fact that based on our history in CBE, based on Excelsior's history in competency-based and nursing programs, we're actually combining forces to design, deliver, and launch CBE programs for post-secondary institutions. So our session today, it's what is the research showing about CBE. Everybody knows there's real excitement about CBE. We believe this is transformational. It feels very much to me like the days of online in the late 90s. I see that role coming up, and it's so exciting to be here. It's really exciting to be building this with all of you in the audience. CBE, why do we care? What are the challenges? Institutions are trying to figure out how to deal with escalating costs of college educations, how to deal with low completion rates, how to deal with the graduation levels that are constantly in challenge and constantly trying to figure out how to graduate students that have college-ready degrees. Career-ready degrees. Market research is showing us, what are we hearing from institutions today that they want to do with CBE? What we're hearing is they want to drive enrollments. They want to drive enrollments particularly with non-traditional students. We're looking at 30+ million students today who are looking for degrees. They want to generate strategic sources of capital. They want to align programs with employers' requirements so that students are actually job-ready candidates. They want to provide competitive differentiation. You're all in a zero-sum game right now on enrollment. So today, let's talk about those issues. We've got 3 questions that we posed to Parthenon a few weeks ago. Rob is going to answer each of those questions, and then John and I will comment on those. We have additional questions, and then we're going to go through a Q&A session with the audience. So first question is, what is competency-based education? Second question is, what student segments does CBE resonate with? And the third question is, what elements of CBE create viable value propositions? So Rob?
Great, thanks, Carol. So you heard the setup here, so I need you to be on my side, because this is a nightmare for me. I've known these 3 long enough to know that they are absolutely going to cross-examine and grill me, so this is going to be my version of a competency assessment, and we'll see how I do. Listen, what I'm going to try to bring to the table today is a student or a market segmentation demand point of view to competency-based education. I'm not going to talk about the good, the bad, the in-between. Maybe I will if you ask me, but try to say, what's the market receptive to? And for those of you who have ever worked with me, you know that typically I'm surrounded by a lot of awesome young men and women who graduated from your institutions who do a lot of work for me, but every now and then I do my own analysis. And what I have on the screen here is my late night analysis, which is I went on the web and I pulled down your marketing messages. So for those of you around the nation who are engaged in competency-based education programs, here's the messages you're putting out there, right? And it's a lot of what we heard early. Flexibly scheduled to fit in busy lives, extraordinarily affordable, so we didn't go with cheap there. Half the other cost, partners with employers, 30% faster. Earn your degree on your terms, right? So these are the messages that we're inundating the marketplace with right now. And I want to spend a little bit of time talking about what's underneath those. So if you think about, the messages that are coming through, I would assert that there are 3 fundamental value proposition elements that most people are trying to tap into with competency-based education. The first one on the left is this concept of accelerated learning. Right, the detachment from time and place. You can move at your own pace. I think the previous panel noted that sometimes detachment from time and pace actually means slower, but it's the self-pacing, and of course we're going to go market saying it's accelerated even if it takes somebody a little longer. The next is this ability to lower the overall cost. That's opportunity cost, that's cash cost, that's everything. I can build with a competency-based education, or at least I have the opportunity to build a lower cost of delivery which I can then choose to pass on to the student. And the third one is this fundamental change in the curriculum and pedagogy, right? And so I can take that and I can give you project-based or experiential or real-world type of education, which I'll show you later is very appealing to many adult degree-seeking students. And then we've got all sorts of elements of the value proposition or tactical things that we can do that can support those value propositions at the top. If I take self-pacing and subscription-based pricing, right? Then I'm probably coming after, if I talk a lot about that, I'm coming after you with a faster, cheaper model. Right? If I start talking about my tutors and my mentors and my instructor and project-based and my employer partnerships, I'm probably coming at you with something around it's a different experience than the educational experience that you might have taken when you were in school before. So very different value propositions. And I think if I were to tag them at the end of the day, it's, get your degree in under X months. You hear a lot of that, right? Get your degree in 2 years, get your degree in 18 months. Or it's a $5,000 degree. I even went lower than the $10,000 degree because I really want to appeal to the politicians on this one. Or it's uniquely applicable in the workplace, right? These are the taglines that you start to hear from it. So I think that's what we're inundating the marketplace with right now. And I'll open that back up and take my cross-examination.
All right, so John, why don't you start? What is competency-based education?
Well, for those of us at Excelsior College, we have 3 different kinds of programs, one of which is competency-based, which we've had since 1975. With the help of the Kellogg Foundation, we designed a competency assessment for essentially vocational and practical nurses, which we then have added mastery assessments in addition. What's really different about our program is that we really benefit from having the profession tell us what the core competencies are. And we also benefit from the fact that all of the nurses we bring into this program have on average about 10 years of experience. They tend to be in their mid to late 30s. This is an older, more experienced group of individuals who frankly would not even be able to access traditional programs. But the absolute key element in the eyes of regulators is the fact that you have to demonstrate in a real hospital on real patients the fact that you have the clinical skills necessary to be a registered nurse. As a result, we have currently about 18,000 individuals studying in this program. We also have mastery exams. Excelsior, under its old name of Regents College of the state of New York, came out of the Regents tradition of heavy examination, primarily at the high school level. But we preceded both the College Board and ETS with giving credit by examination. That's the other way I use CBE, credit by examination. And finally, we have 2 degrees that you mentioned in the introduction that are assessment-based degrees, which do not require a demonstration of mastery, but do allow an individual to proceed through self-study using open educational resources, taking our exams as a means of getting transcripted credit. So there's a little bit of a potpourri here.
Mm-hmm. Okay, great, thanks. And John?
Well, at Northeastern, I think one of the things that probably everybody in this room knows is that we're big on co-op and the experiential learning in general. And where we think about CBE and how it interfaces, we actually have focused primarily on the graduate professional master's space, where many of those are adult students returning to education for either re-credentialing or advancement in their field or to change a field. Now, most working adults who have been out there for a while have developed a certain level of awareness of their own profession as well as competencies that they've built. And within the co-op model and a number of the degrees, for example, in Homeland Security as well as in project management, in years past, when those degrees were taken, co-op wasn't an option because many of these adults were in the field already working. But in the last several years, we've developed, based on the principles of competency-based education, developed a few options for online and working professionals in those areas that are really competency-based credentialing that takes into account an experiential learning part where they are able to build an e-portfolio. It does take into account a prior learning assessment and an inventory of where the student's skill set is, as well as both a formal assessment from the employer as well as the institution. So as you think about the competencies in the fields of healthcare and aeronautics, there's been a long tradition of very stringent concerns around competencies. You don't want your airline pilot or your airline mechanic to go out into the field not really being competent. And so those industries have really responded, as John said earlier, in healthcare. However, in many other professions, such as project management, those employers have slightly different competencies based on the industry that they're really working in. And so this particular model allows that student to identify those competencies with the help and the mentorship of a faculty member and bring those competencies to the table. So even though the CBE discussion has largely been in the realm of the associate's degree and the baccalaureate degree, we think that there's a very rich application for a CBE model in the graduate professional space as well.
Okay, that's great, thanks. All right, Rob, back to you. So lots of discussion about CBE, not a whole lot of research with students, and Parthenon did primary research with students. And Rob, what'd you find out?
Yeah, and I would say, we did not just around kind of some of the hard competencies that tie directly to employability, but also a lot of these soft competencies that people talk about,
Communication
communication,
skills,
problem
management.
solving, all of these types of things as well. The first thing I would say is, we believe fundamentally that markets all have segments, and this summer we did a big segmentation of the college and university going public out there, and teased out a whole bunch of segments and put out a really nice white paper with Jeff Salingo. And there's two areas up there that I would say are important in the competency area. We call them career accelerators and industry switchers. And these are typically working adults. And the career accelerator, you can guess what their motivation is, right? It's somebody who wants to stay in field, believes that completing or getting another degree is going to help them accelerate their career or maintain their career within that field. Classic online adult learner, right? And then we got a group we call industry switchers out there who are explicitly looking to get a degree in order to change fields and move on to something else. Again, a classic adult learning type of profile. I always warn people about the one to the far right, the academic wanderers. These are the folks who, they believe very much that college is going to help them out and change their life. They just have no idea how that's going to actually transpire. And that's the people who are going to be in your degree program for years and years and ultimately drop out without completing, because they don't have any function. But within these two groups here, that is, I think, in many respects where a lot of us think about this concept of competency-based education being most relevant. What I'm going to show you in a few minutes, though, is actually over here in these traditional age students, a lot of the competency-based elements test extraordinarily well, right? Not necessarily that I want to go to a competency-based program, right? But if a lot of those elements of competency are incorporated into the academic program which I'm pursuing, that has actually a real benefit for me. And so for many of you in the room, I think that that's going to be an important thing as we go down the line. And obviously many schools do it. Northeastern's been doing it for years and years with the co-op program. But incorporating a lot of those concepts, and even in traditional liberal arts schools, I think you're going to find has pretty strong market acceptance. So the first thing people always ask us is, how big is the potential market for competency-based learning? And the answer is, we have no idea, right? We're at early days. If you go out in the marketplace and say, are you interested in competency-based learning? People look at you and go, I have no idea what you're talking about. Right, so you have to explain the concept. And any time you find yourself explaining a concept to somebody in market research, you're probably going to get an inaccurate assessment of the market. But we do it nonetheless because we want to have some guardrails. When you talk to people about certifications within specific competencies as part of their overall academic program, you find out that, give or take about a third of them come back and say, you know what, that's interesting to me. I could see that. When you start saying, here's an actual program, right, that's built around competencies, how interested are you in that? About a quarter of the market will come back and say, that sounds interesting. But the litmus test is when you start to put choices in front of them, right? When you start to say, would you go to this program or this program? And when you start to compare choices like that, what you find is that the competency-based programs, as we're currently construing them, come down in about 15% of the marketplace in a market research aspect would choose that program. Don't for a minute mistake that if suddenly we threw 100 competency-based programs that we would instantaneously achieve 15% market share, right? Because there's a lot of blockages between free choice and an assessment versus my actual actions in the marketplace. But we think that, right now about 15% of the marketplace will probably ultimately shift towards competency-based education programs. And I don't know if you think that's big or that's small, but it's right about where online education, fully online degrees are right now. So Carol, your point, it feels like 99. It does kind of feel like 99. Yeah. The difference is in 99, you could not have assembled this group. We couldn't have got this many people together to talk about online education. So we're in front of it this time. So we then went out and put all these elements of competency in front of people again and resegmented because why one segmentation when you can do two? And we teased out 5 groups here. And, you know, we've got this traditional student. They have no interest in competency-based education, so ignore them. We've got this group up here we call it career support, right? They don't have any interest in competency-based education. But 3 segments do, right? This one we're calling, because we had great naming conventions, CBE generalists, right? They're looking to build general knowledge, right? They're more interested in a lot of those softer competency-based education skills. And then we've got this group, the specialist here. They are primarily your career switchers and folks like that. They're looking for some of those hard, tangible skills directly tied to the workforce. And then we've got this really scary group up here, and I want to spend a bit of time on them. They're the ones, we call them the low-cost online folks. Here's what they like: faster and cheaper. Right? So when you describe a competency-based program, here's what they hear: wah, 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 wah. Faster, cheaper? I definitely like that. And the challenge is many of you moving into the competency-based program right now are actually unwittingly pursuing this group. And when everybody goes after the faster, cheaper, guess what happens? You better have your cost structure really, really, really low, because you're going to chase yourselves down, and chase yourselves down really fast. So that's a real part of the marketplace. You can't ignore it. It's about 25%, but I would caution as you think about constructing your programs, if you're going to target that group, you better make sure your cost structure is the lowest in the business, or you're going to get hammered. By the way, everybody up here likes faster and cheaper, right? So this part always hits. These folks just love it. And I think about those, right? So let's talk about these generalists for a minute. I'm going to break my neck looking at this. My CBE generalists, generally older, value lifelong learning. They're not as online oriented, right? So this person is more likely to respond positively to a hybrid program. They're an adult, so it's difficult for them to get in full time, but a hybrid program where we come together once a month or something like that really appeals to an adult learner like this. My generalists or specialists in the middle here, they're the least likely to be employed. They're the career switchers, right? They're adult who something bad has happened and is looking to change up. They value the skills certification, right? They've gone through this before, so this time they want to have real certifications and skills that can protect their employability. And they tend to be online, right? So this is actually your online learner. And this is going to be, I think, you know, an area that people really, really fight after right here. And you know, one of my comments was, don't forget these people to the left, right? That's a very, very attractive student body. And if you don't have a national brand, but you have a local or regional brand, those folks to the left seem a lot more appealing in many ways, because you have a campus that you can base education out of. And then again, these folks over on the low-cost online, you know, they're the ones seeking to avoid relearning content and skills and things that you hear, you know, shorter cost time and less student expense will always be attractive to these folks. So those are the 3 segments that we teased out, and
Okay, great. So,
over to you.
Yeah, great. John, why don't you start on this one? So what student segments does CBE resonate with in your view?
So I have 2 kids in college right now of my own, and so intuitively I think of them entering a CBE type of curriculum, and they probably would be completely lost. These are, you know, both 18 to 20-year-olds. That having been said, I think that there's a lot of, in the space of the adult population, those people who have acquired a certain percentage of their curriculum already, transfer students from community colleges, especially those individuals who have been working their way through, I think are great segments for this particular type of education. But you also need a certain level of maturity and motivation that goes along with that, especially in a field where many of these programs will be self-directed to identify the competencies themselves and to document them. You really need a learner who is very motivated at doing that and understands what the competency is as a baseline. So we're particularly interested in that particular population. The low-cost, real fast piece is not a market segment that we would, as an institution, go after. Having our price point is a little higher than the $10,000 mark. And it is something that we're interested in lowering the costs of education, but realistically for the 18 to 20-year-old that's attending a Northeastern baccalaureate degree, that's probably not the population we'll be identifying.
John?
Well, I think the market is probably huge. I think that 31 million that we've heard about that have some college and no degree could be brought back into the academy and finish that degree if they knew they were going to get some credit for their prior learning, and if we had a process to evaluate that. Pam, talking for Cale, did some research a couple of years ago that shows that the likelihood of degree completion goes up about 2.5 times if you give some credit for prior learning. I also want to caution against start when you want, finish what you want. Our experience shows that means don't finish. It sounds nice, but in fact, we find that we get superior results when we give structure, and we find that the students want structure. The more decision-making you can take out of their hands after they've made a decision to come on board, the more they appreciate it. And I know that Northeastern does that.
Yes.
In regards to preferring one over the other, first off, you don't have to be online to have a competency-based program. We operated until 2 years ago from 1975 without being online. But let me tell you what happens when you go online. I cannot offer enough sections. The do-it-yourself, by yourself, that doesn't appeal a lot. I have more demand of the 18,000 students. We're approaching the halfway mark, and they want to be online. And they like the structure of online. They like the investment we've made in online. It's absolutely state-of-the-art in terms of the instructional design, and that cost us. But we're seeing results. 96% of the students finish the courses they start with us. 96%. I didn't do that well in the classroom. I also don't think that the traditional age student, if we get precise about our terminology, and I'm amazed at how many within the academy don't think that's important, we're not going to have 22-year-olds that are competent in anything other than video games. What we really need is to give those youngsters who have mastered a subject area the opportunity to get some experience to go with that mastery and to show that they are in fact competent. But if you can't do it, if you can't show that you're doing it, I don't believe that you're assessing competence. And this terminology, this isn't about proficiency-based education, it isn't about mastery-based education, it's about competency. Competency means that you've demonstrated that you can do it. As one employer said to me, I don't give a damn what you know, I want to know what you can do.
You know, one thing that I get concerned about in the faster, cheaper model is it's so attractive from a policy perspective and such a simplistic kind of notion to hold in your head while you're formulating legislation. But in reality, the student population that people are the most frustrated with are probably the student population that will do the worst in this particular model, in the sense that they are at-risk students, students who have developmental issues, students who have had a poor high school education by virtue of where they attended school. They don't have the family structure that really brings that discipline to the table for them to go through a fast-paced, self-paced, inexpensive degree with almost no supports. So I really want to echo what John just mentioned here, is this notion of really needing to bring some structure to this. It can't be seen as a free-for-all. And when you start bringing those structures to the table, especially with the student population that's at risk or vulnerable in the classical sense of education, the CBE model price point starts rising because it's those support systems that bring that structure to the table. So my primary concern from a legislative and policy perspective is that the CBE model is a buzzword right now in Washington, except that the only thing that they're talking about is not all of these other segments. They're only talking about the at-risk student populations that were failing already, and they're looking for a very nice, easy, cheap solution to it. And I don't see the CBE model working in that with that student population.
John, I think one of the challenges, particularly when we go online, in a fully online program, the field at large has had real struggles in differentiating value propositions on anything except for price. So we can sit here and say, hey, here's a model that has, full-time PhD faculty at a fairly decent ratio and lots of student support systems and the infrastructure to monitor and intervene, and it has coaches and kind of counseling coaches and everything else, right? And I can say that is a really good model for this student over here. And here's another model that has none of that. right? And the problem is when you look at the marketing messages and watch people make decisions, they don't understand all of the other elements of this, and so they focus in on price. And I think, one of the challenges everybody's going to have in the online world with the CBE education is it's difficult to not be on the price side if you can't get your message through about all those other elements you're discussing and find the people who would value them.
I think one of the things to think about is faster, cheaper, because the student can accelerate their learning and get credit for prior learning, their entire degree will likely be less expensive. It doesn't mean cheaper overall in terms of what you're charging for tuition, but if you think about the accelerated model, the student's overall cost of a degree could be less. So, and I think sort of better, faster, cheaper, like that better quality, if we don't deliver quality CBE programs, the industry will flop. It's the same with online learning, right? So I think that's a major issue on top of us today. So Rob, let's move into value proposition since you're just about to transition there.
Yeah.
So value proposition for students, what'd you find out?
So we'll start with this one on the right here. That one's pretty obvious, right? Be cheap, be fast. I think the challenging ones are the value propositions in the middle of the messaging for those, right? When I look at a CBE specialist type population out there, my messaging in the marketplace should probably never lead with cost, right? It should be leading with employability, skills, and things like that. If I'm trying to appeal to these people over here on the left, actually, I shift my messaging. I'm not going to lead with cost again, but here I'm going to be talking a lot more about the more general kind of lifestyle skills. It's about team building. It's about the ability to problem solve. It's about the ability to work in groups, interpret data, and things like that, right? A little more generalist type of things, because that's what that student's looking for. And I think you've got to build your value propositions around those elements. Then you have a separate decision there, which is, am I trying to do a very full service type of model where I need to really have a lot of support structures in place because I'm going after, students who will have more challenging time getting through the degree? Or am I actually, if I'm going after master's degree programs and things like that, I can actually strip a lot of that out and go with a pretty slimmed down one and achieve a fairly low price. So I think it's thinking through those elements of the value proposition based on who you're targeting there. Just real quick on some of these other skills here, you can see, this is not surprising, and we tested all these, the analytical skills, the diversity skills, the teamwork skills. All of these things seem to do pretty well. In fact, the big message here is there's no one or the other of them that really is dominant, even when you go within sub-segments. The generalists tend to be a little more to the ones to the left here, and the specialists a little less caring about all those things, and the low-cost online people, that's great as long as it's cheap. But most of these concepts test really well, and what's good, they test well with very young people and older people, right? So even looking at a 19, 20-year-old student making their decision, a lot of these concepts are pretty important that they get out of their education and are worth actually incorporating into degrees and explicitly marketing around. I do want to spend a second on what's preventing action right now. Again, you lay out this wonderful opportunity in front of somebody and they say, yeah, I'm really interested in it. And you have to ask, well, what would prevent you from doing so? And you see four basic things that came out of this. Number one, this concept the top tier colleges aren't doing this, so I'm a little nervous, right? In many respects, I joke sometimes it took Stanford and MIT to turn digital online courseware and call it a MOOC, and suddenly online education was legitimized, right? And so everybody suddenly, oh my gosh, we have to have an online strategy because of MOOCs. We're facing that issue in competency-based learning, right? Ultimately, until leading institutions in the world start talking about competency-based education, and I'd argue many of them have been doing it for years, it's not going to really resonate in the marketplace. We called this next one CBE is relatively unknown. That's a bad label. What it really means is, will employers take this? Do employers care about this at all? So making sure and convincing people that yes, this strange, different type of degree is actually something that employers are going to value and actually give you a job for. A lot of concerns over the assessments, right? We sit here, oh, direct assessment, but you get real feedback. That sounds great, but how does that actually work? Right? How am I confident that I'm going to get through this? I don't want to be the guinea pig, the first person who fails all the CBE assessments. So a lot of pushback around how does that actually function and work. And then finally, I think we've talked about it already, this stuff going to transfer, right? Like, we all go into education with the belief structure that we're going to graduate from this institution, but somewhere in the back of our head, we know there's a reasonable chance that I might change or take a step out at some point. I want to make sure that somehow this is going to transfer to my next institution.
Okay, John?
Well, that last point is a real important consideration. We made application back in February to have our nursing program authorized by the department as a direct assessment program. And the thing that's held it up is the fact that we convert all of our assessments back into letter grades. And that's specifically excluded under the language of the Act. So despite 50,000 graduates and 18,000 current students, we still don't have financial aid for this program. It is really important, though, for us to be able to say that the graduates of our program are going to be able to go on somewhere else, get a bachelor's degree, get a master's degree. So you do need to think about speaking in the language of those who are going to be receiving your graduates. And some of the more well-known assessment programs around the country will tell you from time to time they've had difficulties. I remember a few years ago when UC Santa Cruz was going to do away with grades. Well, they reassessed that when they found their graduates couldn't get into graduate school. I think we're going to have to work with credit hour whether we like it or not. I also say that in terms of adding value, I think that we've got to work with the employers. The real value here, like it or not, we educate people for a variety of reasons, but the reason that they spend $200,000 is because they expect to get a job at the end of the day. And what the employers are saying is that people spending that kind of money aren't competent. That's as much behind this movement as the whole credit hour is that the employer community, which I have to believe, or I have to say, I believe is quite confused. I'm not sure they know exactly what they want, because I can show you studies, one done by our colleague from Northeastern, another done by Pew, and they suggest very different things. But the fact of the matter is I want to get a job at the end of the day. And if I have employers working with me, identifying what the core competencies are, working with me in the assessment process, the odds of my graduates being employed just skyrocket. We're in the process of building a competency-based bachelor's degree in business. I've been meeting with the U.S. Chamber of Commerce about what the core competencies need to be in a competency-based business program. I also think that in addition to job, it's where's the average starting salary? My nurses get a tremendous bump when they finish with me. They owe more than double their salaries. That's important. That's a testimony to the validity of our process. I guess in ending my piece of this is that we've got to pay more attention to involving the employer and having assessment processes that are more than multiple choice questions.
And I think following on to that point, a number of employers that we've spoken with have said that when they get students from particular institutions, it takes them 1 to 2 years to train those students, and they can't pick up, in the case of healthcare, they can't pick up a full workload. So the employers are very motivated to collaborate with the institutions around defining competencies that will allow the students to be productive day one, decrease their costs of training, and increase productivity from the start.
One example is I talk to partners in law firms from time to time, and I can't tell you how much dissatisfaction there is within legal education or within the legal industry with legal education, because these ABA accredited big name law schools cannot produce students that know how to write. They are incompetent in terms of their ability to write.
So John, value proposition for students?
Yeah, the value proposition, I think it also kind of points to the struggles that schools will have when they start thinking through a strategy on CBE. And just to point out the intricacies around this notion of involving the employer in the discussion is you have a traditional faculty who have been raised and lived and breathed academia forever, since they were 6 years old when they got on the bus at preschool, all the way to the employer who probably hasn't been in a formal classroom for the last 25 years, an entrepreneur who is out there building their business. And as they come together, they don't have a language to talk in common with. Although, and there are ways of mitigating that, and there's certainly a lot of tactics you can use to bring those two populations together. So if, just getting to the translation of what those competencies are from the employment sector, and then having faculty be able to feel comfortable that their world is not being taken over by the big corporation or by the man, is a really big struggle culturally for our institutions. But I think it is the hard work that's necessary to make a CBE program really viable. This notion that listen, let's face it, students have gone through higher education there for our entire history as a nation for a better job. And if we're not going to be sensitive to that in this day and age, we're just not going to be able to move our students from the classroom into the workforce in a smooth way. So this precursor to a CBE program or a viable CBE program, and the notion of quality, I think, is tied to this, is that relationship by bringing the employer much closer to the institution. Now, at Northeastern, obviously we have co-op as an instigator for that rapprochement. But I think for those institutions who have been averse to having even simplistic conversations with the employer community beyond fundraising, is really going to be a tough struggle for them to bring that. And I also think that the federal policies need to be brought in line. We're talking about one of the struggles of bringing this on. Federal policy is just not conducive right now to making some of these things happen. We need a period of exploration, a period of innovation, a period of examination, and there's going to be some failures along the way. People are going to try new things that are not going to work. You're going to have disasters. You're going to have failures. But you're also going to get a much clearer idea of what works well, and we just need an atmosphere right now from a policy perspective that allows institutions to push that envelope without being penalized. And right now, kind of the policy framework that's surrounding a lot of the work that people who are interested in advancing CBE really hit up against some pretty fast walls from a regulatory perspective. And I'm not talking about the accreditors. The accreditors have actually been quite supportive of these types of initiatives. We're talking about financial aid policy, credit transfer issues, and a variety of other things. So the policy framework here, if Washington is truly interested in seeing better models of education be brought forth, the policy framework needs to be kind of accommodating to that level of experimentation.
So that's a later panel. So
Carol, just to build on that for a second.
Yeah.
The one thing that I'm the most concerned about with this movement, I believe in letting 1,000 flowers grow. I also believe that there's a place separate and apart from the credit hour for mastery-based education. Mm-hmm. But if we go around saying that we are turning out competent individuals and all we've ever done is give them multiple choice questions, it's not going to take too many employers saying there's no competence in your competency.
Totally get
I
it.
think it's a great point. This concept of competency-based education in the marketplace right now is very diffuse. It's a lot of different things. So if I do credit by assessment, right now, I'm in competency-based education. I think you would say you're not.
No.
But in the marketplace, I am, right? I'm going to define it that way. I'm going to go to market that way. And so we either have to get comfortable with this broader definition or tighten it up over time.
Master the skill, apply the knowledge, transfer the knowledge to a new area.
Right.
So lightning round, 15 seconds each. All right, John, how does the faculty get involved in a CBE model?
Well, I think we absolutely need the faculty involved, but they're going to have to play different roles than they have in the past. They've got to work in collaboration with employers about how we fill skill gaps, what didactic measures we want to take in order to meet core competencies. Individuals may not have all of the skills. We'll need some, perhaps even classroom instruction. And it needs to be a cooperative relationship between employers and the faculty.
John?
Yeah, I think that facilitating those conversations between the corporate and employer community and the faculty and traditional academia and finding that common language, I think is going to be a struggle, but I think really exciting in the long run because it will create a framework by which for once we'll be able to have a conversation with the employer community about what is meaningful both from an academic perspective and the employer community.
Hear a lot from liberal arts colleges about CBE and the role of CBE. John, role of CBE with liberal arts students?
Absolutely. We know there are some core competencies. In fact, the Lumina Foundation and their DQP is on the cusp of having some competencies that they're calling for. I know that we all see evidence that we want people that know how to write, we want people that can do problem solving, we want people that can think critically. These are things we can actually ask for demonstration of. I believe there's a whole lot of potential in the whole business of demonstration that is scalable using computer simulations, and that's the direction we're headed in with our research and development right now.
Role of liberal arts?
Yeah, you know, when Rob put up the list of competencies that people want, the lion's share of them are liberal arts competencies. I find that it isn't that CBE is not applicable to liberal arts education, quite the contrary. I find that in my conversations with those individuals in the liberal arts, and this is going to be a little bit of a criticism here, is that there is a hesitancy for them to actually start quantifying and identifying what those core competencies are that their students are getting out of their credential. And so if they could make that leap, I think the CBE model is very much in line with what a liberal arts education is all about in this country.
Carol, let me hit that one real quick, because we hire a lot of kids out of liberal arts institutions, so we love them because they bring all of these skills. But I think there's a bit of a brand identity crisis going on, that we don't talk about these skills loud enough. And then I would say there's another element, and I'm going to throw it in the competency bucket. If you put a sidecar on a liberal arts education that is actually more employment-oriented, which allows people to go and do business-based projects with groups, problem-solving, outside of the academic community. Don't try to get your faculty involved in that piece, but layer it onto the side. It's very, very receptive. The marketplace loves it, the students love it, the parents love it. And it's a very interesting, you can take these elements, and those are actually embedded in a good liberal arts education, and then put some of the more, we would say, business type of competencies to the side of it. And I think you've got a very, very interesting product that resonates fantastically in the marketplace.
I think one of the things that we're talking a lot about is sort of degrees tying to employer requirements, but also it's gen eds tying to majors. So when we think about competencies, we think about driving it all the way back to the freshman level courses so that the students are actually being prepared for their majors, not just being prepared for employment. And when I think about liberal arts and sort of that core base of knowledge and how that plays into an overall degree, I think it's something to think about, competency-based on the gen ed level. So, all right, get ready for your questions. One more, bumper sticker for students, Excelsior College. Why?
Well, it's not necessarily cheaper, it's not necessarily faster, but by golly, you're going to get a pay raise when you get done.
All right, there we go. And Northeastern's bumper sticker?
A real-world education, just pure and simple. It is what I think most people are very interested in making sure that they do get out with a better job and a better life. If higher education in America has had one promise throughout its history, is that our students will have a better life when they exit, and the economy is tied to that, and they do need a better job, and that's our promise. That's our value proposition.
All right, terrific. All right, let's open it up. Let's have a few minutes for the audience questions. Feel free to step up to the mic. Everybody's hungry, so we're going to, yeah, here we go.
A lightning round.
Lightning round, right. Anybody else can come up with your bumper stickers, too.
No bumper sticker, but it strikes me that
The microphone's not on.
it's not on.
It doesn't sound like it, yeah.
I need the competency to turn it on. Sorry about that. It strikes me that spinning off the comment of our friend from Northeastern, that competency education may be like MOOCs, that in order to be successful, to have the skills to be successful, to complete a MOOC, which starts with 100,000 and ends up with 3,000 or 4,000, you need a good education. My son took 2 MOOCs. He had a liberal arts education from Boston College, He had a very good elementary and secondary school education, so he knew how to study. He knew how to apply himself. So when he got in this environment where it was all up to him, he had whatever it took to do it. So I'm wondering if how you would react to that. Does it take a solid education in order to have the kind of commitment, skills, and whatever it is in order to complete a competency-based program?
It's a really good question. So what's the screening process for a CBE student? John? You wanna start?
Well, in our case, we found that everyone is not cut out for a competency-based program. In fact, the average entering student has 10 years of professional experience, is 39 years of age, is licensed healthcare professional at a position other than that of a registered nurse. And when we've deviated from those criteria in terms of trying to be broader in accessibility, it's not done either the student nor the profession any service. You have to, over time, see who's succeeding, who's not, and then be sure that you're working with those who have the greatest likelihood of that success. I'm not sure that's necessarily going to be the case in areas like business and some other areas that are not perhaps quite as life-critical as nursing is. On the other hand, if you don't have any experience, I think it's more about assessing the experience that you've had and determining whether or not there is an equivalency there to some forms of education. I don't value one more than the other. I think you have to have some intersection of both experience and education. And it's the experience, though, that I question whether the traditional age student is going to have that sufficiently to really be deemed competent.
Yeah, listen, I'd go with the MOOC analogy, right? If I do take a online digital courseware, make it completely asynchronous and give you no support structure, well, we're not going to have too many people get through that. We shouldn't be shocked by that. If I throw a coach or a tutor in the background, actually, I can expand my reach. If I throw full-time faculty in the background and start to monitor student progress and to intervene, I expand my reach anymore. And if I take the digital courseware, a MOOC, into the classroom and do a, quote, flipped classroom, I can reach more. And I think competency-based education is like that as well. If I offer you a competency-based education with virtually no support in the background, I'm going after a narrow slice of the market. By the way, it's a very good slice of the market to go after. There are people out there who will really value that education, and we should serve them with that, right? But for most of the students, I'm going to have to put a lot of structure in place. I'm going to have to put monitoring in place. I think all those other elements are what expand or contract the market.
And add cost.
Yes, and add cost. I mean, everybody likes it cheaper, but you know, I can't give you faculty with a low ratio and support structures in the background without putting cost in the system. It's not possible.
I think there are direct lessons here from the online experience going back to the 90s
Yes, exactly.
through to today. We've learned over time that blended learning or a hybrid, both online and face-to-face experience is a very powerful model from a learning model. And I think that incorporating CBE type of components within a traditional undergraduate curriculum may very well be a very powerful model in the long run. So for your son going through a MOOC and even after a very robust education at BC, their ability to kind of be self-motivated through that for a lot of us, and you're talking to somebody who's signed up for 4 MOOCs and never finished one, you know, it's the discipline that's needed, the structure. And so I think the combination of both, you know, perhaps some traditional formats of education coupled with CBE, I think is really an exciting opportunity here for educators to see where the synergies are to really spice up the quality of the experience as well as achieve the goals of persistence and graduation that we're all looking for.
A lot of us have talked about, go ahead, John.
I'm just going to say one lesson we ought to learn from MOOCs that we can apply here is let's pay attention to learning outcomes. There's not been much attention paid to learning outcomes with MOOCs. We need to be sure we're doing that with CBE.
Yeah. And as we're talking on the panel, a lot of us are talking about the non-traditional career-seeking student, and I think when you think about a CBE model, If you're motivated because you want to switch your career, change your career, that sets up a different dynamic than a student who's not really sure what their degree is for. So I think, the qualifying is often going to be around the student who's got a career goal in mind. Okay, next question.
Hi. As I'm listening to this and through readings, all the different possibilities and outcomes of CBE, I'm just wondering, kind of thinking big picture outside the box, the extent to which all of you panelists, particularly the presidents of the institutions, think about the fact that to some extent CBE kind of opens up a big floodgate of competition because people are still thinking in terms of package degrees. You have a 2-year associate's degree, you have CBE that's going to lead to a 4-year bachelor's degree. But this also opens up the whole idea of smaller packaged building block credentials or mini degrees that can be combined in a variety of different ways from different institutions. And that also opens up the possibility that non-traditional organizations, private institutions, that are not traditionally accredited are going to be able to offer competing packages of mini certificates and degrees, and it's going to just really open things up for a lot of questioning about the value of the packaged traditional degrees as a whole and what that's going to do to the whole concept of traditional colleges and universities. And I think that this is something that I'm sure that traditional educators and administrators have to be thinking about. I'm wondering what your thoughts are on how that might play out in the future.
John, why don't you start?
Well, I think most traditional educators are most comfortable teaching traditional age students. And that's not where I see this having its greatest potential or benefit. I've been one of those, even in the online movement, that said I didn't want my kids going to college in the bedroom at home. You can do it online, but that's not the way to do it. I think that the fact that we're going to have non-academic institutions helping to fill in skill gaps can actually be helpful to us and not necessarily competitive if we're adding the value of coming from a place of credibility, accreditation, recognition with valid assessment instruments, and that the outcomes are the ones that people expected when they started down the path in the first place. Am I getting a better job as a result of this? And if I can show that I have the knowledge, regardless of where it was gained, and I've gone through a process that we value and show you that I know how to do these things, I'm not sure I care where those skills came from in the first place.
See, I don't think the market's going to turn that way soon. I think you got a couple problems with the, it's a great conceptual and intellectual idea that will value bundles of competencies and they'll be exchangeable as badges and things like that. But when it comes to getting employed, it starts to break down, at least for the foreseeable future. Even if you go into fields where bundles of competencies probably would have the most marketability, IT technicians and things like that, where you have recognized certifications, right? Audio and video engineering, right, where it's about your ability to do something and degree is not required. You find that the certificates tend to get bundled within degrees because employers understand degrees and we still value them, right? The best way to get a job as a new video technician or a sound and audio engineer is to actually have a degree, even though it's not required. Right? Because as an employer, who am I going to hire? The non-degreed person with a portfolio or the degreed person with a portfolio? So until employers start to devalue degrees, I think it's a difficult thing, which isn't to say that it's not going to be there and be a niche market and things like that. I would be very reluctant to think it's going to be a scaled market anytime soon.
I think the whole notion of competition is an interesting one, and I think a lot of people in our industry have been averse to the notion of competition. But let's face it, there's a total disaggregation of education happening already right in front of us. The model that Rob just mentioned a little earlier about the liberal arts institution coupling a work experience, that sounds like a co-op school to me. But in fact, if you think about what's going on, there's right now in the venture capital world and in the startup world, there's a number of organizations that are doing just that. They are developing experiential-based kind of side-along programs and charging a pretty penny for it, and making some money. In education, I think if we're going to be intimidated about competition, then we're probably going to have our lunch eaten for us. What we really need to be talking about is where does our quality standards come in? Where's our value proposition? What kind of rigor are we putting behind what we're saying in the marketplace? And when we're more genuine and authentic about that, then the competition is just going to take care of itself. If it's going to be a fly-by-night company looking to make a fast buck, they're going to be out of the market within 2-3 years. Let's not worry about them. Let's worry about ourselves and making sure that we get the deal right for our students and for our value proposition within the market. And in fact, we should actually welcome that, because some of the best ideas happening in higher ed right now started in the for-profit world. And, you know, God bless them, some of them are struggling, but I'll take the pedagogy of an online education at Northeastern any day of the week, and based on a lot of information where some of those startups really started and failed, and we learned the lessons from them. So my general feeling about competition is you don't want anybody kind of outdoing you on the quality side, because then you lose the proposition.
I think an interesting thing to think about with credentials is, can you stack them into a degree and then have a relationship with your alumni that can come back on an ongoing basis for additional credentials. So it's a point of differentiation. Last question.
First of all, thank you for a really terrific panel presentation. And what I really appreciate is that you're beginning to try to create knowledge structures that we can test, going back to your very first slide, which I thought was terrific. I have a question and an observation. The question is, I know the topic of the day is competency-based, but I still have the sense that there are as many meanings as there are people in the room divided by 10. And what I've found useful, and I'd be interested in your, whether it's a transitional phrase or not, the notion of evidence-based evaluations, which get to the projection of capability on the job, as well as being able to analyze Shakespeare. So that's one. Number two, whether it takes 2 years or 10 years, the problems you're describing, if you go back and review, Christensen's literature, are exactly the problems that disruptive trends in society do. It's a suspicious product. It is being done with people who we have not paid attention to. It is cheaper. I can't get my business model to do that business model. And I don't for a minute think that we are the IT industry or any of the other examples he's used. But I would be interested in your thinking about how this fundamental gap between what we can do because it's possible to do it that we couldn't do 10 years ago, and what the hell we're going to do about it in our existing business models.
Well, thank you for the easy one, Peter. One of the things relative to the technology that I can tell you that offers great promise for us is the opportunity to do meaningful learning and outcome assessment, evidence-based, using that technology in ways that we couldn't have 45 years ago when we started working with Kellogg. When I have to go negotiate an agreement with a hospital to be able to come in on the weekend and have our faculty take a dozen people through a hands-on assessment process that has them actually administering medications and various therapeutic actions over the lifespan, from geriatric to pediatric, that's not scalable. We are at the limit of our scalability with that kind of a program. On the other hand, it's possible to do so much through very lifelike simulation. In fact, we can do things with those simulations we can't do in the real world. Particularly, let's take criminal justice as an example. I can be doing things with a simulation relative to shoot, no shoot, use of force, rules of evidence, all of the things that are critical to understanding whether someone is a good prospect for employment in law enforcement. I can do all of that through simulations. And those simulations and your performance on those simulations not only give us evidence to show that you have competence, they also, when you fail them, give us the opportunity to show where your skills need to be improved upon.
I think the assessment question is really key here, and I think that there's a lot of confusion around what an appropriate authentic assessment is, especially for both faculty and academic administrators who have traditionally done the point and click or the multiple choice exam as an assessment tool. And you know, there's room here for some specialization and bringing people within your organization who have spent some time really thinking about what an authentic assessment is. And you know, I think that there's a lot to be done on that side of things. I also think, just to add to John's notion of the simulation, is machine learning has really taken off in this country. And I know there's a lot of buzz, probably big data is the bigger buzz than CBE, but we've been privy to some of the work that's happening both, you know, within our computer science area as well as some of the other computer science areas, and some of the technologies around big data and machine learning are really going to be able to, in the not too distant future, really help us in some of these more authentic computerized assessment tools that really will be extremely close to what you would get in a real life experience in the hospital or something else. And I know that that spooks a lot of people, but it also is a great opportunity and it's very exciting. We're not there yet, but I do think that cracking the assessment pieces is really going to be key to making sure that we can achieve scale on a lot of these types of programs.
I'd like to make just one closing comment relative to the challenge that you should expect with competency-based education. And it comes with professions that are regulated, as is nursing. At any given point in time, I will have a board of nursing in one of our 54 jurisdictions threatening us with the loss of recognition for our graduates. Despite 45 years of history and 50,000 graduates, there are those that do not think that our methodology is appropriate for nurses. You can't show any evidence that they perform at any different level, but the fact of the matter is these bureaucratically controlled, often volunteer boards can control your destiny. And if your graduates can't be recognized for entry into the profession that they came to you for entry into, be prepared to spend millions of dollars on lobbyists and lawyers.
All right, on that upbeat note, Rob, John, and John, thanks. Let's go chew over CBE at lunch.